G'day everyone, thanks for tuning in to the next episode of my Toyota Coaster bus conversion. Now in this video I'm going to be laying the vinyl flooring in my bus. So I'm going to show you what I do to prep the floor and then how I go about laying the vinyl. I have no experience with this whatsoever, so it should be interesting. I've chosen to go with vinyl flooring in the bus because it looks good, it's easy to clean, and it's fairly water resistant. So if I do get any spills in the kitchen or the bathroom area, it should help to protect the underlying subfloor from any significant water damage. Now when it comes to vinyl flooring, there's really two main options. There's sheet vinyl and vinyl planks. Now a lot of people choose to install vinyl planks in their bus, and there's a few advantages to this. The first one is that it means that you can leave installing the actual vinyl floor until the very end of the conversion. So you can build all your cabinetry and interior walls and everything and then fit the vinyl afterwards, because it's fairly easy to cut and shape the planks to fit around the furniture. The other advantage is that if for any reason part of the floor is damaged, then you've got the option of just taking up one or two of those planks and replacing those rather than having to replace the whole floor. So there are some good reasons why vinyl planks on the face of it sound like a good option. But the reality is it's a bit different laying vinyl floor in a bus compared to laying it in a house. In a house, you've usually got a nice, perfectly level floor. The house is on solid foundations. It doesn't usually move a great deal. Whereas in the bus, you're in a moving vehicle, so the bus is constantly moving. Buses are generally not as well insulated as houses, so you get much greater shifts in temperature usually inside the bus. And with those changes in temperature and the movement of the bus, you can get shrinkage and expansion of the vinyl. And sometimes that can be enough to actually separate the planks, so you end up with big gaps that are visible in between them, or the planks might sort of lift up at the edges. With all the posts and the comments that I've seen in the various Facebook groups that I'm in, it is very common for people to have issues with their vinyl planks. So even though they might look really good when they're first laid, after a while a lot of them have issues with gaps forming in between them, or the planks lifting up and just not sticking as well. So I didn't want to have any of those issues. I've chosen to go with sheet vinyl. My thinking is also that with sheet vinyl you've got one continuous piece that covers the whole floor, so there's no joins or potential for any little gaps to form in between. So I just feel like it's going to give me just that extra little bit of protection from any water that might get spilled onto the floor over time. Now the challenge with that is that, of course, if I waited until I'd built all my walls and cabinetry and everything inside the bus, it would be quite a challenge to cut and fit a piece of sheet vinyl in amongst all of that. So it's going to be easier for me to lay the sheet right at the beginning before I build anything else, and then I'll actually be building straight onto the top of the vinyl. Now obviously there are some downsides to this. If the vinyl ever gets damaged, it will mean that I have to sort of cut most of what is visible out and replace that, so it's a little bit trickier. And of course, if I'm putting the vinyl down first and building on top of it, I need to be really careful about protecting the vinyl while I'm building. So despite those things, I still think that doing sheet vinyl is the best option for me. So hopefully I can get it done and then get the rest of the build done on top of it without causing too much damage. So before I can lay down the vinyl, there's just a few more jobs that I need to finish with the floor, so I'll get started on those. You may recall, if you've seen my previous videos, that I had issues with mold in the floor of the bus, and I actually did a video about how I treated that floor with oil of cloves. And I think that treatment has actually worked. I hadn't seen any evidence of the mold returning after doing that, but just to be doubly sure, a week or so ago I actually sanded the floor again and painted it with another coat of the oil of cloves, and it's actually now looking really good. So the next thing I want to do is put some extra pieces onto the floor just to fill these gaps around the wheel arch. Now the original 12mm thick floor that was in the bus would have been level with these pieces of metal around the wheel arches, but because I've installed an 18mm thick floor when I replaced the floor, it's now sitting up a little bit higher. So what I've done is I've actually cut some pieces out of 6mm ply, and I'm going to fit these in like so. so that they'll sit flush with the floor, and that means that when I lay the vinyl, I can lay the vinyl right up a lot closer to the wheel arches than I would have been able to do otherwise. So I've cut all these pieces out and I've sealed the underneath with a couple of coats of the Cabothane Clear Sealer just to protect them underneath. And now I'm going to glue them down. And I'm just using the good old Sika 221 to glue them down because that's what I've got and it works well. And have a look at what I've done. I've just put the Sika on the wrong side. Awesome. Okay, I managed to get pretty much all of the Sika off. There's still you can still see a tiny little film of it, but hopefully once it's dried and once I've sanded the floor, I'll be able to get rid of the rest of it. It won't matter. Yeah, okay. Now I'm going to apply the Sika to the correct side of the piece. And I'm just going to weigh that down. And I'm going to do the same for the rest of the pieces. So the next piece of the floor that I'm fixing up is the area around the battery hatch. So this is the hatch cover where you access the starter batteries for the bus. And this hatch cover, as you can see here, has a little latch on it that locks in to this piece of metal here, which is actually welded onto the frame of the bus, so I can't move this at all. And the issue I had was because the original floor of the bus was only 12mm thick, obviously this hatch lock was designed to fit a 12mm thick floor. And when I installed the new floor, which was 18mm thick, I had to cut this piece here, do a separate section here out of 12mm so that the hatch could lock down onto that hole there. Now, the problem I had then was I've now got the challenge of how to trim this and make it look neat, because I've now basically got this area of floor that's sunken down compared to the main floor, and the difference in height is only 6mm. So I was having all sorts of challenges trying to find some nice trim pieces that were small enough that I would have been able to trim this off neatly and have it like looking half decent. And it was doing my head in until I had an epiphany the other day. Instead of trying to adapt the floor to suit the hatch lock, why not try to adapt the hatch lock to fit the floor? And that's exactly what I ended up doing. You can see in the middle of this lock here, there's a screw that connects the actual latch bit to the handle on the other side. And all I did was I pulled this apart and replaced this screw with one that was identical, except it was a little bit longer. And it's a bit hard to get close enough here, but in here I've just put a little stack of washers, and what that did was it brought this latch out further away from the hatch. So now what I'll be able to do is fit a 6mm piece on this floor to make it level with the rest of the floor, and my hatch lock will now fit into that quite nicely. So I've now cut out this piece from 6mm ply, which I'll be able to just glue down into there. So this section will now be level with the rest of the floor, and my latch will now be far enough down that I can sit it on the 18mm thick floor and it'll lock nicely into that. So I'm just going to glue this using the same kind of Sika that I glued the other pieces down with, just that this time it'll be easier to apply the Sika to this piece. and then sit my new piece on top of it. And I'm just doing a similar thing with the fuel sender hatch at the back of the bus. I originally had routed out a little edge for this hatch cover to sit down into, but I've done a similar thing to what I did with the battery cover. These were the original screws that were holding the hatch in, and I just got some screws that had an identical thread but were just a little bit longer, and I filled this routed area in with a little thin piece of the 6mm ply to make it level with the rest of the floor. And now with the longer screws, I'll be able to sit that hatch cover flush with the rest of the floor. Okay, so I've got all my pieces glued and they're all weighted down. I'm going to let them all sit there for at least 24 hours now to let that sticker properly cure. Okay, so I ended up having to work the weekend, so it's actually been 3 days now that the pieces around the wheel arches and the battery hatch have been weighted down, so they should be well and truly stuck on there. And you can see that they don't look too bad. Most of them are pretty flush with the main floor, which is good. This one over this side's a little bit rough. There's a bit of a gap there, and there's a gap there. I didn't measure that piece terribly well, but I'm not too worried because I'll be able to fill in those gaps when I put the floor patch on. The next job is to try and get a nice even surface on the floor so that I can lay down the vinyl sheet. So in order to do that, I'm going to do a little bit more sanding, mostly around the edges of the ply, just to make sure that they're nice and flush with each other. For instance, there's a little bit of a step here where the pieces of timber are not quite flush, so I'm going to try just giving that a bit of a sand so that they're all level. And then I'm going to go and fill in all the gaps between the sheets and fill in where the screws are, just to try and get a nice even surface so I can lay my vinyl. So now that I've sanded the floor and got the sheets of ply as flush as I think I can, I mean, it's still not perfect, but nothing is in a bus. I think it'll do. My next plan is to fill in all the gaps and holes in the floor with this stuff. I've never used it before, and I was thinking I could just open up the pail and slop it on, but now that I've actually read the instructions, I realised that it actually requires a bit of pre-mixing with water first. They actually recommend you use an electric paddle mixer, which I don't have, so mixing it might be a challenge. And the mixed stuff is apparently only usable for 15 minutes before it starts to set. So I'm thinking it's going to be a bit trickier to do than what I was originally thinking. And it also says in the instructions that the timber should be primed first. So I'm probably not going to get to do this today because I'm going to need to prime certainly the areas where I want to put this stuff on. I'm going to have to prime them first, so I'll do that today. Now, I have already swept and vacuumed the floor after I sanded it this morning, but just to make sure that I get rid of all the dust and any loose dirt particles before I put the primer down, I'm just giving it a quick wash with a damp cloth. So this is the stuff I'm using to prime the floor. It's Dunlop Primer and Additive. It's an all-purpose one. You can use it on a variety of different surfaces, including timber. And the idea with this is that it'll just help to seal the timber and provide a better surface for subsequent things like the floor patch filler and the vinyl adhesive to stick to. So I'm using this one, and when using it for timber it says you can use it undiluted. So now again, I've never used this stuff before either, so tip a little bit into there. I'm not sure, so it's very runny stuff. I'll give it a little bit of a stir, but it looks pretty well, like there's no lumps or anything in it. So I'll just use this little bit first, and I'm just going to use a brush. It says you can use a brush or a roller, but just because at the moment I'm just going to do really around the edges of the sheet supply and over all the screw holes, basically all the areas where I'm going to want to put the patch filler is what I'm going to do at this stage. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to use, and I think it'll be just easier to do it with a brush rather than a roller. So we'll see how we go. Okay, day off today, so I can finally get back to working on the floor. Today I'm going to tackle the joins and the screw holes and stuff in the floor and try to patch over them, make a nice even surface so I can lay my vinyl. And this is the stuff I'm going to be using. It's called Dunlop Floor Repairer Rapid Patch, and you can use it on timber as well as a bunch of other surfaces. I'm a little bit nervous about using this stuff since I've read the instructions. I've not used it before, and apparently I need to pre-mix it with a little bit of water. And the other day I stopped at Bunnings and picked up an electric mixer attachment for my drill, so hopefully I'll be able to mix it well. And then once it's mixed, you've only got 15 minutes to use it, which kind of makes me a bit nervous. So I'm obviously not going to mix up the whole bucket. They say to mix the 5 kilos in with 1.5 litres of water, but I'm thinking I might just do a third of this at a time, which, if my maths is correct, should mean I'm going to weigh out about 1.67 kilos of this and add 500 mils of water to it. I hope that's right. Hopefully I can get that mixed up well enough, and then I'll have to be pretty quick with filling in the holes. I've never done this before, so this is going to be really interesting. Okay, well that turned out to be not quite as bad as I was expecting. I didn't get a lot of footage of me using that stuff, unfortunately, just because I wanted to get in and just do it before it started to set, and I didn't want to have to be mucking around with cameras and things. So it's actually a powder, this stuff, so it's pretty easy to just scoop out when you're measuring it out. And I just use these digital scales that I have, sat my bucket on here and scooped this out till I got to the 1.67 kilos, and then I added 500 mils of water and mixed it up. Despite what the instructions say, you really don't need an electric mixer to mix that stuff. In fact, I tried using the mixer attachment on my drill, and even trying to go as slow as I possibly could with the drill, it was just flying everywhere and making a mess. So I ended up giving up and just using an ordinary paint mixing stick, and that was perfectly adequate for mixing it up. I had no trouble whatsoever. So if you're going to use this stuff, don't bother trying to do it with an electric mixer. You'll just make a huge mess. Just stick to a nice big wide paint mixing stick and you'll be fine. Turns out you do get a little bit more than 15 minutes to use the stuff before it does start to set. It went on much easier than I was expecting, to be honest. It was my first time ever using a trowel for that kind of thing, so it was a bit messy, but I think I did a reasonable job of filling in all the gaps. And after I'd smoothed it out as much as I could with the trowel, I then went around with a wet rag just to clean it up that little bit more and get it as smooth as I possibly could. So this is what it looks like now. It's already starting to dry, you can see. I'm reasonably happy with that. I mean, you can still tell where the gaps are, but most of them are pretty much filled, and the floor is certainly, like, it feels a lot more level now than it did before, so I think it'll be fine. Once I lay the vinyl over, it should be smooth enough for that. So I'm just going to let this dry now. It does say that it will set and you can walk on it within 45 minutes, but I'm just going to leave it now for the rest of the day and we'll see what it looks like this afternoon. Well, this is what the floor looks like now after that stuff is dried. I just did a test roll out with my vinyl just to see what it would feel like walking on top of the joins and so on. And unfortunately, there is still 2 spots I'm not 100% happy with. One here and one just here, which just happened to be in the middle of the walkway, so you will be walking over them. And it's just because the 2 sheets of ply in this section here are just still not quite level. I have already tried sanding it back a fair bit, and I thought that putting that filler in the gap there and over the top a little bit would help. But it's still not quite enough, so what I'm going to do is just try sanding this down a little bit more to see if I can get rid of that step there, because it is noticeable. And I mean, I could probably get away with not doing it, but I just know it's going to irk me, and now's the time to do it, because obviously once the vinyl's down, there's nothing else I can do with the floor. But otherwise, most of it's pretty good. I couldn't feel any of this section up here walking over it. I'm especially happy with how it's filled in and leveled the gaps here and the pieces I put around the wheel arches. So most of it I'm pretty happy with. I'm just going to try sanding a little bit more to see if I can get those 2 spots there a bit better. Okay, well, I've sanded that as best I can. It is better than it was. You can still feel that there's a little bit of a rise there, but I think I'm just going to make it worse if I try and sand any more of that back. At least the transition is a lot smoother than it was before. And I think once the vinyl's down, it won't be that noticeable. And in this area here, I'm actually going to have a rug down on top of the vinyl, so I don't think you're even going to notice it once the floor is in. In any case, that's the best I'm going to be able to get it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prime this whole floor, and then when that's dry, I should finally be ready to lay the vinyl. Okay, so it's been a couple of days. The primer has well and truly dried, and I've got a few days off, so I'm finally ready to actually lay the vinyl. The first thing I'm going to do is just lay out my piece of vinyl sheet and just rough cut it so that it fits around the wheel arches and the battery hatch and everything else. And then once I've got it roughly cut to shape and in position, then I'm going to come back and put down the glue and stick the vinyl down. I actually kept the original vinyl that I took out of the bus when I first got it, because I was planning to use that as a template, but the fact is it's just so manky, it's filthy dirty, it's really stiff, and it's just horrible, and I don't want to have it anywhere near my nice, clean, brand new vinyl. So I've decided to just ditch the idea. I'm hoping that it'll be easy enough to just lay the piece of vinyl that I have out and cut it in place. Fingers crossed. Well, that was a bit tricky to get the sheet into position because the wheel arches kind of get in the way and distort the big sheet as you're trying to pull it around. But I think I've managed to get it roughly centered. What I did was I marked that where the center is on the floor at the front, and then you won't be able to see it, but up the other end on the door I've marked where the center is up that end, and this line here in the pattern of the vinyl between these planks here is roughly the middle of my sheet. It's a fraction longer on that side, but I'm not going to worry about that. So I've just maneuvered it so that this line is in the center of the bus. So hopefully that'll look okay when everything's in position, because it would look a bit odd if the planks in the vinyl were kind of a little bit skewed compared to the furniture and so on. So hopefully this will be fine. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and rough cut around the wheel arches and up the back there so that the vinyl's sitting nice and flat at least, and then I can go around and cut all the other sections, like around where the battery hatch is and the fuel sender hatch up there. And this is what it looks like. Pretty happy with that, actually. It's still a little bit rough, and I still need to do some more trimming around the step area and around this battery hatch in particular, but I'm going to leave that until after I've glued it down, because I don't want to risk cutting too much off this and having it shift a little bit as I'm gluing it and then being sort of too far away from the edge. So I think that will be enough for now. Once I've glued it down, I'm hoping I can just cut it a little bit more, make this a bit neater and trim it right back closer to the edge. I'm going to leave it curling up the sides a little bit, just because I think that give me just that extra little bit of water protection if anything gets spilt under the sink or whatever. My walls will actually be coming down sort of in front of this, so I'm going to leave that for now. Hopefully I can get it to stick to the walls as well as I can get it to stick to the floor. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So now it's time to glue it down. Okay, so the time has finally come to glue the vinyl down, which is both exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking, I have to say. Anyway, hopefully I can do it without mucking it up. The stuff I'm going to be used to sticking it down is this stuff. It's Dunlop carpet tile adhesive. You can use it for carpet tiles as well as vinyl, and it's a pressure sensitive one. This particular one will actually stay tacky, so I'm hoping that'll make it easier if for any reason I need to lift up the vinyl and readjust it when I'm gluing it down. Hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier to do that. Now, the instructions for this say that you need to paint the glue on first, and then you need to wait for it to set and to actually go tacky. And according to this, that can take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. I'm hoping it's closer to 2 hours and not 4 hours, or I'm not going to get this done in one day, but we'll see how we go. So I'm going to do half the floor at a time, which will just make it easier. And so now that I've got the vinyl in position, I'm going to peel back half of it. I'm going to paint the glue onto the floor and then wait for it to dry a little bit and get to that tacky stage. So this is what the stuff looks like. Doesn't seem to require a lot of pre-mixing, which is good. It says you can use either a trowel or a roller. Now, I'm not so great at using a trowel, and I think it'll be easier for me to get a nice even coverage with a roller, so that's what I'm going to use. That's one side painted on. I hope I've done it thickly enough. We'll see, I guess. So I've coated the floor, and I've also gone up the sides a little bit because I'm going to be curling the vinyl up the walls a little bit on the sides. So I'm going to let that sit now, and I'll just keep checking on it regularly over the next couple of hours. And once it's tacky, and not too wet, then I'm going to roll this vinyl back and press it down. Okay, so it's been not quite 2 hours, and the floor is definitely feeling very tacky, and nothing much is staying on my fingers when I touch it. So that's actually perfect where it is now on the floor. But you can see on the sides there that it's not quite transparent yet, like it's still quite wet on the sides there. So I need to wait for that to just set a little bit more. I'm not even sure if it is going to set nicely on the wall there. Maybe it's not really suitable for metal surface. I don't know, that might not actually work at all, but I'm going to give it another half hour or so and just see. But the floor at the moment is looking pretty well where you want the glue to be. Okay, well, it's been a little bit over 2 hours now. The floor is definitely ready for me to be able to stick the vinyl down. The little bit that I painted the glue onto the side walls is still not quite 100% ready. Most of it is nice and transparent and tacky. There's a few patches there where I probably painted it on a bit thicker where it's still quite wet. Honestly, I'm getting a bit impatient. If I have to wait another couple of hours for that little bit to dry, then I'm just not going to get this vinyl laid today, and I really want to get it done. So the floor is definitely perfect for sticking the vinyl down. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'm not too concerned about those little bits on the side. The vinyl's going to pretty much stay up there on its own anyway, and the walls are actually going to come down in front of that, which will also stop it flapping over down the track. So I'm just going to go ahead now and stick this vinyl down. Okay, I'm really happy with that. It actually went down much easier than I was expecting. There weren't as many air bubbles to get out, at least none that I can feel anyway. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the other side now. I'm going to roll the other half of the vinyl sheet back, apply the glue, and once it's nicely transparent and tacky, I can stick the other half of the vinyl down. You can already see how when I got to the edge that I've already painted the glue up to, how much harder it was to lift the vinyl up in that section, so it's obviously working really well. I am just peeling it a little bit past where I glued up to before because I want to make sure I'm overlapping the glue a bit so I'm getting a good coverage underneath, especially in the middle. Guys, the floor is done. I'm so happy with it. I'm not sure why. I was really quite nervous about doing the floor. I was worried I was going to muck up the vinyl and have to buy a whole new piece or something, but it was actually a lot easier than I was expecting, and I'm really happy with the way it's turned out. I still want to come back and finish off this battery hatch cover. There's a metal piece that I need to screw into the floor that this end hooks into, and I'm going to take off this original vinyl, which is obviously not in a very good state, and cover this with the same vinyl that I've used for the floor so it'll blend in a little bit better. I'm probably also going to paint the metal cover itself, but I can do that at a later date. For now, I'm happy that the floor is done there and the hatch is sitting really nicely down onto that. And I obviously also need to put some trim around the step, but I need to clean up this step area, and I haven't quite decided what I'm doing with that yet, so I will try just to keep this edge as protected as I can for now until I'm ready to finish off the step area and trim this out. And if you're wondering why I haven't covered this area at the very front here, it's because I'm going to be mostly building this in. This section here, if you'll remember, if you saw my floor video, I actually did in 12mm ply, which is the same as the original floor, because I want to put the original passenger seat back here, and I needed to make sure that the bolts and everything were going to fit perfectly for that. So I'm going to actually put a separate little piece of vinyl here, which will go in and around the passenger seat when that's back in. And then the rest of this from here out to the wall is actually going to be built up probably almost to the same height as the engine bay there. And that will all be storage and another step up into this area. So you won't actually see any of this because it's all going to be built in. Fingers crossed now I can do the rest of the build without damaging the floor.